previously. And so you can just do that by clicking the import button on the sprites and then selecting the sprite itself. So for now, we're just going to start with the ship sprite because we just want to get the movement down and make sure that's working before we go to anything else. So does everyone have a ship sprite in their GameMaker project? Does anyone need help with that? Oh, GameMaker Studio? Okay. Yeah. Unless you want to make your own art assets, which is completely fine. So does everyone else have a ship sprite on their GameMaker thing? Yes, no, no. All right, should I move on or should I wait? I'm trying to gauge the audience here, but I don't want to move past the sprite part and then start doing other things and then not have people understand what I did with the sprite part. The import button's right here, next to edit image. Okay, so I'm just gonna move on now. So this is what the ship sprite is gonna look like. And so once I have that, I can go over here to objects and then make an object. So in GameMaker, what an object is it's essentially a blueprint for what is going to be programmed. So this is where all of your, or not all of your, but most of your programming actually takes place when you're using GameMaker. So the sprite, remember, is just the images that are being drawn on the screen, and the object is essentially the thing that does stuff. So I'm going to associate the sprite with the object by clicking here. It says no sprite currently attached to the object. I'm going to attach sprite 0, which should actually be named, according to GameMaker conventions, sprites should be labeled SPR underscore and then whatever you want to call them. It's not really important during the drag and drop stuff, but once you start actually programming, if you do decide to do that, you need to be able to differentiate between the sprite component and the object component. And we do that by labeling the object obj ship and the sprite SPR ship. Is the text big enough for you guys to see? Okay. So now we'll go to the room. By default, GameMaker Studio gives you one room to work with because it needs something to start playing. And the room, if I click on this, is essentially what you see when you start playing the game. So right now, this grid is just for reference. It doesn't actually exist in the game. But right now, if I was to start playing the game, I would just have a black screen. So I can fix that by dragging a ship into the game. And now if I press the play button up here, our game is essentially just going to be a black screen with a ship in the middle. And the ship isn't going to move around because we didn't actually do any programming. So I'm going to close the room tab up here and then return to my workspace. So now, should I go on to programming the ship, or are people, no? Where are you guys in this process? Like, do you have a sprite? Do you have an object? Are you downloading GameMaker? Okay, so the room is on the right side. GameMaker should start with a room 0 already created. And if you just double click on that, once you're in the room, you can drag objects from your object list into the room and place them that way. All right. Do most of you have this? Okay. So the way objects work is they all listen to events. So instead of actually having to, I don't know if you guys use Unity, but you have to like make listeners and stuff. GameMaker has these things called events, and so this is what triggers what programs your object. So some common ones are like when the object is created. So if you want to initialize anything with the ship, like how much health it has, how fast it moves, whatever, you would do that under the Create tab. Most of our programming is going to come with the key presses tab. So when you press a key, something should happen to your ship, right? So the first thing I want to do, I'm just going to go to key down and then up. So this means whenever the up key is pressed on my keyboard, we're going to do whatever is on GameMaker is in here. And so this is where the drag and drop features come into play. All these things right here are pre-built things that control how your object works. They're sort of color-coded based on what they do, but we'll get to that in a minute. So right now, just for a proof of concept, I want to go down to the Movement tab, and I want to just make sure that this is working. So I'm going to set the speed when we press up to 5. And that's just arbitrary. And by default, it's in type direction. Direction is a built-in variable in GameMaker that says what direction the object is currently moving. And by default, it's 0, so that means the object is going to move to the right. So now in my game, if I press up, the ship is going to move to the right, and then it's never going to stop because I never programmed it to stop. And it's just going to go off the screen. So that's just like a basic overview of how the programming works. The event key down up is going to trigger, and then we're going to set the speed, and it's going to start moving. So with asteroids, there is a little bit of physics involved. It's not as simple as go forward in the direction that you're facing. So what I'm actually going to do is in the Create event, I'm going to initialize a few variables. So this is under the Common tab, and there's an Assign Variable button. Does everyone have a Create event and an Assign Variable button in their thing? Okay, so the first variable that I'm going to create is going to be called my direction. And so this is going to represent what direction our ship is currently facing. So the convention we'll be using is 0 is directly to the right, 90 is directly upwards, and 270 is downwards, sort of like how they do it in math with trigonometry and whatever. And I'm also going to make a variable called thrust, which is how fast or how much speed you gain when you press the up button. Oops. And I found that a good number for that is 0.4. But you can play around with it. That's why making a variable called thrust is really important, because then you don't have to go through all of your code and find these magical numbers that are labeled 0.4 and edit them manually. The event is the create event. So when the object is created, we're going to assign these variables to that object. So the variables, the way those work is whenever the object is just floating around in space, it's going to have variables assigned to it. So some basic variables are like X and Y. Those are where it's labeled in the room. You don't have to really worry about those. But right now I'm adding additional variables to it, 2 of them called my direction and thrust. And so everywhere else in the object's programming, it's going to be able to reference my direction and thrust in anything like this. So now that we have that, I'm going to program what happens when we pressed on the left and right arrow keys. So I'm going to change my direction. And I'm going to, when we press left, we're going to want to rotate counterclockwise. That means add 5. And I'm going to check this relative button here. What relative means is instead of having my direction equal 5, we're just going to make it plus equal 5. So relative is whenever you want to add to something or subtract to something, that's what you use. Otherwise, it just sets it to the value you're saying. Similarly, when we press the right button, I'm going to just duplicate this for key down right. I'm going to subtract -5 here. And that way, my direction is always updated to be the way the ship is facing. But currently, that doesn't actually affect how the ship is displayed on screen. So I'm going to make another event called the step event. The step event is probably the most important one. This is what happens every tick or every step of the game. So every time the game goes through its logic, it enters the step event. So whenever you want to constantly check for something or constantly update something, you're going to do it in the step event. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to assign to a built-in variable called image angle. And I'm going to assign the value of image angle to be my direction. Image angle is a built-in variable that dictates which way the sprite is rotated. So now that we have this, our game should be able to rotate the ship, and if I press up, it should just go to the right. So the ship is rotating. You're seeing that the ship is actually kind of like moving around some sort of orbit. That's not really what we want, because we want the ship to be able to rotate in place, right? And if I press up, it's just going to move, and regardless of which direction it's facing. So the reason for that, I'm going to go back to the sprite here. The reason for that is because, well, my origin was actually way off. But you want to make sure this origin point is in middle center, and then I'm just going to lock it here. So the origin is where the sprite is essentially anchored. So when I refer to its x and y coordinate, it's going to refer to the pixel coordinate of the center of the ship. Does everyone have an origin on their ship? Does anyone need help finding where to edit that? The game you can run with the play button up here, or F5. And then it'll like compile down here, and it'll pop up with a window. And to run a game again, you have to close the existing game. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the ship here. And now, instead of setting the speed to be 5, I'm going to do a little bit of physics here and say I'm going to go for this speed button here, and I'm going to specify horizontal speed, and then using trigonometry, we can specify how much horizontal speed the ship is going to gain based off of which angle it's facing. So by default, the ship is facing angle 0, so we want the cosine of that angle to like send it fully horizontal. So the math behind that is going to be thrust times, I just need to make sure that the trigonometry function for degrees is what I think it is. Okay. So this is going to make our ship go in the horizontal. It's going to add speed in the horizontal direction of our ship. Let me zoom in here. It says thrust times d cosine of my direction. So my direction is the built-in variable that specifies which way our ship is facing. And then I'm going to just add its component for the horizontal direction. Similarly, I'm going to do the same thing for the vertical direction. And I'm just going to make that d sign. But it's got to be negative because in GameMaker, the positive y-axis points downwards. So 0, 0 is the top left corner of the room. And so in general, these modules here, you can see they're linked. That means for GameMaker to do these in order. And you can see a summary of what your event looks like on the left, and that just gives you a brief overview of what exactly you're doing. When we get to if statements, you'll see that there's going to be branching paths. But for now, as long as you just drag it below it, it should be fine. And so now we have, I want to make this relative again. Does everyone have this, or should I slow down? All right. I'm slow down. Okay. All right. So right now, what we have is a ship that is going to accelerate when I press up, and it's going to be able to turn. But we want to be able to decelerate our ship, and so the way I'm going to do that is I'm just going to add friction. So I'm going to set its speed to be 0.96 of its speed. So for those of you who really love math, you should know that if I multiply the speed by 0.96 and I let that go through enough ticks, eventually speed is going to reach 0. So this is just like a really primitive way of doing friction, and that'll slow down the ship, and it'll also fight against acceleration. But if we play around with it, I think that it should look pretty good. So I can like turn my ship and I can maneuver it, sort of. Okay, so that's kind of cool. So that's actually most of what needs to be done for the ship. Does everyone have a ship that can move around the empty room, or is there anything that needs to be fixed? Also, if you need... How do you put objects on the workspace? Well, to make a new object, you go over here, but... Oh, from your... Well... How do I put it in the room? Okay, so if I click on the room here, if I drag the object from the right-hand side and put it in the room, it should just appear. And then from there, you should be able to move it around. Or maybe not, I don't know. Yeah, you can move it around. So the next thing we're going to want to do is make asteroids, because that is the point of the game. So in my new sprite here, I'm just going to import, for now, I'm just going to import the big asteroid. And I'm going to anchor it in the middle just because that makes things easy. And I'm going to label this one SPR big asteroid. By the way, if at any point you get a little lost, I included a folder of the completed version of the game, so you can, if at some point you get lost, you can just refer to the completed version. It might be a little complicated because there's a lot of things going on, but that's a good reference. So now similarly, we're going to make a new object, and this one's going to be for the big asteroid. So I'm going to call this obj big asteroid. I'm going to set its sprite to be the new sprite that I just created. And when I create the big asteroid, or when the game starts, or when it randomly spawns, I'm going to go down to the movement tab, and I'm going to do this little like double arrow. One of them's white, one of them's gray. And I'm going to set its direction to be any one of these 8 directions. So this is just how you randomize which way the asteroid is going to move. Sure. Do you guys have a big object asteroid? Or a big asteroid object? Okay, so the direction is just specifying which way the asteroid is going to move, but I need to give it some speed as well, so we've seen this before. I'm just going to set the direction to be 5, or the speed to be 5, and it's going to follow the random direction that we just set. And so in the movement tab, there's this little, let me zoom in. There's this little like double arrow. Oh boy. This double arrow squiggly thing, and then if you select all the arrows here, it'll be able to move in a random direction. So once I have this, whenever I create an asteroid, so we can just put a bunch of asteroids in our room like so. At the beginning of the game, all the asteroids are just going to move in a random direction with a relatively slow speed. So one thing I didn't show was that they eventually go off the screen, but in asteroids, the asteroids should be wrapping around the screen. So to fix that, I'm going to add an event in the other category, and it's going to be called outside room. So this means whenever an object is outside of the room or it goes beyond the boundaries, I'm going to make it, this is in the movement tab. There's this like red thing, I don't know, infinity symbol, double infinity symbol, and this is just going to make it wrap around the room both horizontally and vertically. So now if I play my game, the asteroids are going to be moving in a random direction, and when they go off the screen, they should reappear on the other side. Yep. Okay, so now that we have asteroids and we have a ship, the logical thing to do is to say, well, when the ship hits an asteroid, it should get destroyed, right? So this is where we introduce collisions. So under the collision event, you'll see, I'm working on the ship right now. At the collision event, you can select whenever it collides with a big asteroid. What you can do here, so the way I actually programmed the game was that instead of actually destroying the ship, it just jumps to where it was. So if you search for jump, there's a jump to start button, and that'll make it so that whenever you hit an asteroid, you're just going to jump back to the origin position wherever the rim set it up to be. And I'm going to in the asteroid event, when it collides with a ship, I'm going to destroy that instance. So that just means get rid of it and remove it from the game. Does everyone have that, the destroy instance and the jump to start mechanics with the collision events? Am I good to move on? Okay. So right now in our game, there's just asteroids that are floating around, and our ship is going to hit them, and it's going to respawn. But that's no fun. We want to be able to deal with the asteroids. So I'm going to make a new sprite for the bullet. Oops. I'm going to import the bullet sprite. Call this one SPR bullet. Put it in, anchor it in the middle. And then I'm going to make an object called OBJ bullet. And I'm going to attach the bullet sprite to that object. So the way we're going to create this object is under the ship object. Whenever the spacebar is being pressed, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an instance of the bullet wherever the ship is. So and the event is going to be called key down space, and then I'm going to select the create instance button, which is under the instances tab. The symbol is a light bulb, because I guess that's how they wanted objects to be created. So I'm going to create a bullet, and for the position of where I'm going to be creating this bullet, I'm going to be creating it at the ship's X and Y origin. So relative again means X plus 0, so that's just your X value, and Y plus 0, that's your Y value. If I didn't have these relatives, it would spawn a bullet on the top left corner of the screen, and that's not what we want because we want the bullets to be shooting from the ship itself. So this creates the bullets, but the bullets aren't actually moving yet. So what we're going to do is when the bullet is created, we're going to give it some speed and direction. Oops. You want this second direction button because that allows you to specify any direction which the ship could be pointing in. So you might notice a problem here, and there's no obvious variable to assign to this because the only variables we have for direction are part of the ship, and this is the bullet. So it doesn't actually know what my direction is. And if I was to run the game, it would crash and it would say, I have no idea what my direction is. Why did you want me to set my direction to my direction? So what we're going to do here is we're going to reference the OBJ ship's direction. And in GameMaker, you do that by writing the variable, or the name of the object, a dot, and then my direction. And this goes into the object if one exists in the room and references its my direction variable. So this is going to align the direction of the bullet with the orientation of the ship. And then for the speed, I'm just going to make that 10, and it's going to go in the direction of the ship. Does everyone have the programming for both the instance creation of the bullet and the creation of the bullet itself? Okay. So I'm just going to play the game real quick. And we should see bullets coming out of the ship whenever I hold the space bar, and they go in the direction that I'm facing. And so right now I can just continuously fire bullets and make nice patterns, but nothing else is really happening in the game other than when I crash, it respawns me. So what we want to do now, there's several things you could see yourself doing in the game. You could implement what happens when the bullets collide with the asteroids. You could implement having a cooldown on the ship. This is really where the game design aspect of making games comes into play, because you might think it's fun to just shoot bullets infinitely, or you might think that, I don't know, making art with bullets is the game itself. But because we're trying to recreate asteroids, we're going to implement what happens when the asteroids collide with the bullets. So whenever it collides with a bullet, I'm adding this to the event in big asteroid. What I'm going to do is I'm going to destroy the asteroid itself, and then, well, normally in asteroids you create 2 instances of the smaller asteroids, but we don't actually have those yet, so I'm going to go ahead and make those. So I'm just going to make a sprite for the medium asteroid and the small asteroid so that we have them for later. Okay. So now to save what we've done with instead of recreating obj big asteroid and copying all this stuff into it, I'm just going to right click on big asteroids and I'm going to duplicate it. It's going to make big asteroid 1. And really the only change I'm going to make here is that I'm going to make the sprite be a medium asteroid. And this keeps all the programming that we had before, except now under a big asteroid, when it collides with a bullet, I'm just going to make 2 medium asteroids. I should rename this to medium asteroid. And so you're going to want to spawn those relative to where the asteroid is. So you actually want to destroy the instance after you create these. So this is exactly the same way we created the bullet, but this is just when we want to create the medium asteroids out of the big asteroid. And similarly, I'm going to duplicate the medium asteroid and make small asteroid. So the idea here is that when the medium asteroid gets hit with a bullet, we're going to want to make 2 small asteroids. Okay, does everyone have that, or is there something I should repeat? I went through that one kind of fast. So right now in my game, I have the programming for small, big, and medium asteroids, and what happens when they collide with bullets. And so because I copied them, I don't have to worry about what happens when the medium asteroid is outside of the room, what happens when it collides with the ship, and what happens when it's created. Just for the sake of having a cooler game, I'm going to make the smaller asteroids move a little faster. So let's make the medium asteroid move at speed 7, and the small asteroid move at speed 9. So now let's see where our game is. I should be able to shoot plenty of bullets, and it destroys the asteroids whenever they get hit with bullets and they go into smaller asteroids. So there's one thing I forgot, and that's the bullet actually still exists once it hits an asteroid, and that means that one bullet can essentially take out an entire asteroid. So I'm just going to create a bunch of events here. Whenever the bullet is colliding with the asteroids, I'm going to delete the bullet itself. And so, again, this is in the bullet, the object bullet. When it collides with big asteroid, destroy instance. And I'm going to duplicate this for colliding with the medium and colliding with the small asteroid. Okay. So now the asteroids have a little more of a chance because one bullet can't just take out all of it. But we still have a pretty big advantage because we can just fire bullets forever. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to implement a cooldown for the rate at which the ship is firing bullets. So there's lots of ways of doing this, but I think the easiest way, we're going to make a new variable here. I can hit the plus sign under the create under object ship. The plus sign to give it more variables when it's created. And I'm going to make this variable called cooldown. So initially it's going to be 0, and the way I'm going to program this is that when cooldown is equal to 0 or less, we're going to be able to shoot. So when I'm holding down spacebar, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do an if. So if expression with a variable. So if you search here for if, and this first green thing is the if statement. So I'm going to check if cooldown is less than or equal to 0. And instead of having these be vertically aligned, I'm going to move this to the right. And this means that there is a condition. So if this condition passes, it's like a flow chart, we're going to go to the right. And otherwise, if we were to program things down here, they would just follow. So let me show that. So this chains with the if statement, because this this blue bar is below under the if statement, but if I drag it below the if variable, this statement here is always going to happen. But if I move it to the side, it's only going to happen if the expression is true. So the other thing we're going to do here is whenever you end up firing, you're going to set cooldown to, I don't know, let's say 10. And so that'll raise cooldown so that we shouldn't be able to fire for a little bit. But we have to also reduce the value of cooldown. So in the step function over here, again, the step is what happens every frame of the game. I'm going to reduce the value of cooldown by 1. So I do that with the relative check button, and this is like saying cooldown minus equals 1 every frame. So yeah, cooldown is going to be like minus 1,000 if you never shoot, but as soon as you shoot, it's going to bump up to 10, and then it's going to have to wait until it's below 0 again to be able to shoot. So let's quickly test that out, and it should be in my game that we can't fire forever. The shots are a little more spaced out, and the asteroids suddenly have a good chance. So now we essentially have everything that we need for our game to be working, except that it's not really a game yet because there's no score or there's no lives or anything. So what I'm going to do here, to keep track of everything that isn't part of the game, I'm going to create an object that doesn't have a sprite, and I'm going to call this the manager object. So this is going to be some like overarching sort of object. I'm going to put it in the room, and you're going to notice that it doesn't actually have a sprite attached, so it's just this little question mark in the upper right corner. It doesn't really matter where you put it. It can't interact with anything in the game. So this guy is going to keep track of your score, and he's going to keep track of how many lives you have left. So the way we draw the score is under the events tab. There's an event called draw, and this means that every frame you're going to draw whatever I say in this event here. So the draw tab calls from a special category, from the drawing category, and here we can draw draw instance score, and then that's going to draw how many points we currently have. So I'm just going to put this at 3232. That's like the top left-ish part of the room, and it's going to draw the score. So currently the score is 0 because I never updated it, and by default every instance has a score of 0. But I'm going to change that by saying that whenever these asteroids are destroyed, so I'm going to, in big asteroid right now, I'm adding an event called destroy. I'm going to set the score of object manager. So the way I just did that is this little drop down arrow on the right here. If you click this, you can apply this expression to any other object in the room. So if I was to apply to self, it would actually set the object of big asteroid score upwards, but that's not what we want. We want a global manager to keep track of our scores. So I'm going to select object manager, and you can see on the left here, it sets the score to 0 on object manager, but instead I'm just going to increment the score by 5. So add 5 to score on object manager. So similarly, Sure. So right here, so the set score, there's a drop down arrow, and this has an applies to, and then you can select which other object. Other is only used for collisions, and all sets it to all logic here. I can just copy this, and then in medium asteroid, when medium asteroid is destroyed, I'm going to paste that in, and I'm going to add 10 to the score. And then in small asteroid, when this is destroyed, I'm going to add 15 points to the score of other monitors, or two other monitors. Anyway, so we have the score working. Now we're going to get the lives working as well. So under Object Manager, when it's created, or essentially when the game starts, I'm going to set the lives to 3. So lives works the same way as score does. It's built into every object, but I'm just going to keep track of lives under the Object Manager. And so under the draw step here, I'm going to look for this draw instance lives. And the way this works is it actually draws the sprite. So in the original game, instead of using a number for lives, it did that arcade style thing where it draws the actual ships, and it drew 3 ships because I had 3 lives. So I'm going to select the ship sprite. I'm going to order them horizontally, and I'm just going to draw this at like 3280. So that puts it a little below where the score is, and it should be drawing 3 of them. So the way we update how many lives we have is the same way we updated the score. So whenever this collides to asteroid, I make this jump to start, but I'm also going to want to edit the number of lives that Object Manager has. So I'm going to set this to minus equal to 1. So subtract 1 to lives on Object Manager, and I'm going to duplicate this event for the collision with all the other types of asteroids, the medium asteroids and the small asteroids. So now when we run the game, there should be 3 ships on the screen here, and whenever I collide with an asteroid, I'm going to go back to where I started, and I'm going to lose a live. So let's just make sure that's working. Okay, yeah. And so these lives currently don't really do anything because all we're doing is subtracting until it has no more lives to show. But in the Object Manager here, if I make a step event and then I do another if statement, so if the lives variable is equal to 0, then what I can do is I can restart the game, or restart the room. And so this way, when you run out of lives, the game restarts, and that should be the entire game. So I'm just going to kill myself to make sure everything's working. And once I hit this last asteroid, the game should start over. Oh, it didn't start over. Oh no. All right. You can't use this button here. You have to use the if lives button. So if that's equal to 0, then I'm going to restart. And now I'm just going to test that out with 1 life. off the screen. Okay, yeah, it worked. So I just noticed that we ran off the screen. So in the ship programming, I'm going to add outside the room the same way we did with the asteroids. When you're outside the room, you want to wrap your movement in both directions. And so the only thing that I didn't add here was the little rocket booster. That's a little complicated because it involves like changing sprites and going into the draw mechanics of the ship itself. But with what we have here, we essentially have a working version of asteroids. So my goal with this was to essentially give you the basics of what GameMaker is. There's a whole lot more you can do with it without any programming experience. But with the free edition, which I'm assuming is what most of you have, they put like a limit on how many sprites and objects you can actually have, but you can make some pretty cool games in not much time with all that. So does anyone have any questions? Cool. If you want, I don't know. I know GameMaker pretty well. If you want to ask me like how to do other things, like if I was to do a game with levels, how would I do different rooms? You could ask me stuff like that. But there's a lot of YouTube tutorials on GameMaker, which are really helpful. And because this is marketed towards like younger audiences who don't know how to program, they're normally pretty helpful with how to make games of any type. So yeah, that's all I had for how to use GameMaker Studio. So now you guys all have a functioning version of Asteroids, or you could just steal my version of Asteroids from the Google Drive and claim that you made it. Alrighty. Cool.
I forgot to give a little plug. I feel obligated to do this. So, there's like a startup, I think, called Pramazo that does stuff where basically they like connect students at school with companies to do basically what I understand it as is like a like a contractual job, and you can like develop certain software solutions for them according to their needs during while you're enrolled in school. Provides a pretty good opportunity to get some valuable experience professionally. The founder came to me a while ago asking me to promote. They have an opportunity coming out with TransUnion, the credit reporting agency. The engagement is going to be about 6 weeks long. So if any of y'all are interested in that, come talk to me and I can connect you. So besides that, thank you all very much for coming to this week's Hack Night. I believe the next one is that you? It might be the highly in demand Meg Grassi might give us the famous iOS dev tutorial next week. So hopefully you all can look forward to that. It's been a little while. Yeah. But yeah, also, if any of you all, I mentioned this in the Facebook post, any of you all are also, willing to give a guest, not really lecture, guest tutorial, kind of like what Vinny did today. Feel free to contact either me or Meg or Brandon, who was here earlier. And we'd be happy to fit you into the schedule because that's a part of it, right? Like you are part of the community, you can share the knowledge as well. So we encourage it for sure. Okay, that's it. Thank you for coming, guys.